Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 3 p.m. ET, and we are so thrilled and delighted that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 16 going on 17 novels of suspense, 17 if I get my edits done, which is kind of iffy at this point. My current book is One Wrong Word, which is so cleverly displayed casually on the door behind me. My upcoming novel is All This Could Be Yours, which comes out September the 9th, about a debut best-selling author on book tour who finds she has a Faustian bargain to pay. And that comes out September the 9th, as you know, the same day as Dan Brown's new book. So that'll be so much fun. So when you hear about Dan Brown's new book, and you will, you just say, oh, my friend Hank has a book coming out the same day, and it is called All This Could Be Yours. But talk about brand new books. We are here today, you all, to talk to the beautiful, amazing, brilliant, iconic Laura Lippman with this really brand new, more than a brand new book, a brand new everything, Murder Takes a Vacation, which is just out today from Doubleday. It is not only a terrific mystery, a terrific traditional mystery, but it is thought-provoking and lovely and affectionate, and I teared up at the end. I honestly did. It's a mystery, but it really made me cry. It's so relatable and so touching and so fun and so wise. This is Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman. Laura, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that lovely, generous read of the book, which I do hope, in addition to being a mystery, is a book about what it's like to be an older woman in our culture and the possibilities that are still ahead of us.
Yeah, it comes through so gorgeously in this book, and probably that's why one of the reasons it made me tear up a little bit too. I was thinking how if someone says it's a Laura Lippman book, there's a thing that you think a Laura Lippman book is, and this kind of isn't that. But on the other hand, every Laura Lippman book is about something much more than the plot. Can you talk a little bit about if that's top of mind for you, or if that's what you have going in?
I love hearing that, because it's always been there. Even from my first book, there was always kind of it's like, I'm so old, I'm referencing Groucho Marx and You Bet Your Life, but there was always kind of a secret word where I was like, this is in my head. In order to write the book, I would have to say, this is also about. And from my first book, Baltimore Blues, it was, yes, this is a whodunit, but it's also about what happens when you're not what you always told yourself you were going to be when you grow up. And since then, I've written about friendship, I've written about family. I mean, on and on. And, maybe some of the words repeat, but there's always something else I'm interested in. I used to joke that, I'm terrible at titles anyway. I used to joke that each book should just be called What's on Laura's Mind Right Now? number whatever in a series.
This is the trust book. This is the friendship book. This is the love book. This is the whatever it is. I do think it's interesting, because I read an interview with David McCullough once, who was asked, do you have a theme, Mr. McCullough, for every book that you write? And his answer was, yes, there is. And I write the book to find out what it is. But do you go in with it? So you go in with it.
I mean, that's a really great, interesting question. I go in kind of knowing, okay, there's a big secret and this is what it is. I don't know how my characters are going to find out. I don't know what's going to happen to them as they find out. And I know they're going to find out other things as well. I do think that, I'm curious if this is true for you, Hank. I do think there's a process of discovery that's beyond plot, and I definitely subscribe to the old saying that's been attributed to various people, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. I believe that. And I do find that everything I write, there's going to be something that I learned that I didn't know going in I was going to learn. And that's true even maybe especially so when I'm writing personal essays, which I do more and more. I honestly don't really know where I'm going to end up.
So it's a way for you to discover the story and what the story means. And because your characters are real and doing things that real people would do and thinking the way real people would think, maybe they discover it with you.
I think yes, absolutely. And I think one thing that I'll say lay people don't understand about crime writing is that the best crime writing is character driven. Like a clever plot doesn't work if your characters aren't doing what your characters would do. Like as soon as you try to compromise the character that you've established for plot purposes, you're just going to lose everybody. So you create these characters. For me, the reason I do so many drafts is because I get to know my characters better with every draft, and they deepen, and they're discoveries that I make about the very characters that I made up. But yeah, the best crime writing is about the characters, it's about the people. And, I think if you ever read a book where the plot is very high concept, but it feels kind of hollow, it's because the characters aren't quite right.
Exactly. We'll talk about more in a minute, because talk about the characters being quite right. This is Muriel Blossom in Murder Takes a Vacation by the marvelous Laura Lippman. If you just joined us, this book is out today. It is already #1 in 2 categories on Amazon. You cannot do better than that. Murder Takes a Vacation, out today. Let me tell you a little bit about Might of Blaze. Oh, before I forget, though, one of you lucky commenters will win a copy of Murder Takes a Vacation. Just leave a question or a comment or just general adulation and praise for Laura in the comments, and we will spin the wheel of fun at the end of the show, and one of you will win a copy of this book. You know what to do. The rest of you, if you don't win, run, click, and get your own copy of Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman. Not right now. Just wait till about 30 minutes until the show is over. Then run, click, and get your copy. If you are new to A Mighty Blaze, you should know that it was started at the beginning of the pandemic by the marvelous powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us discovering new books and talking about books and sort of being together in the writing community. And we have been going strong for 5 years now. And we are so honored that you all are here today. So many of you are here. Christy says, love the title. Sue Street, Beverly and Emily are here. Mary Garrett is here. Renee is here. Shannon Hansen is here. Shannon says, I see the word no.
Oh, yeah. I think every woman should have the word no hung in a very visible place in her home. I'm in my dining room. I have the letters no hanging here and in my office. I think it's the most important word a woman can have in her vocabulary. And it should be someplace where you see it every day and think about, like, every day you should wake up resolved to say no to at least one thing. I'm really quite serious about that. I know people talk about the world of yes, and this is my year of yes. That's great too, but don't underestimate a day of no.
I was just going to bring up my year of yes, and don't underestimate the year of no, or saying no is so wise and so powerful and so empowering, actually, because it gives you a little bit of control over your life, which we don't have much of these days unless we take it. Hey, Stephanie. Hey, Renee. Hey, Sharon Bishop is here. This is so nice. Stephanie says, no, so true. Although Laura also lives part-time in New Orleans. So you could also say that that's what it stands for. Very wise, very wise. Let me quickly tell you about Laura Lippman, and then I promise I will stop talking and let Laura talk. Since Laura Lippman's debut in 1997, she has been recognized as a distinctive voice in mystery fiction and named one of the essential crime writers of the last 100 years. Stephen King called her special, even extraordinary. All of her friends do too. And Stephen King is a pal, I'm sure. Her books have won most of the major awards in the field, I think all of them, and she was just recognized as Grand Master by the Mystery Writers of America. Her work has been translated into more than 25 languages. She lives in Baltimore and New Orleans, and with her teenager. So let's talk now finally about Murder Takes a Vacation specifically. Tell us a little bit about the book, however you'd like to describe it.
So I think when I've been talking about the book, I think about the fact that it had sort of 4 inspirations, or 4 corners. One of them was very simple in that I was watching the film Charade, which I love. Mm-hmm. But I also love playing with sturdy old stories. So it was like, okay, Charade, but the woman is the older person and the beautiful young person is now the man. What happens? How does it change? I was intrigued by the idea of doing straight up Agatha Christie, Murder on the Nile. What would that look like? To me, that felt that felt like an extremely daring choice. And I'm always up for doing new things, daring things. I liked kind of just tipping my hat to Dashiell Hammett because this is a book that centers, ultimately, we find out, on a missing statue of a bird. I have always been obsessed with the children's book or, chapter book from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, which is, again, about a statue and its provenance. And I was very interested in the issues of provenance. And finally, this book is kind of about the women in my family. My sister influenced Mrs. Blossom. They're more alike than Mrs. Blossom and I are, in that my sister's very shy, not well-traveled, hasn't gone far from Baltimore. There's my mother who loved to travel and was incredibly active and happy, and then died. It's very weird to talk about a 93-year-old woman dying suddenly, but that's kind of what happened with my mom. And finally, there's a little bit of me in there, because what Mrs. Blossom and I share in common is that our 60s look different from what they thought they were. Both of us thought, I think, like, I don't know, but yeah, I would say that Mrs. Blossom and I both assumed that in our 60s, we would be with our longtime husbands. And Mrs. Blossom comes into her 60s a widow. And early in my 60s, I got divorced, which I didn't see coming. And so it's like, okay, again, that question of what's your life going to be like when it doesn't look like what you thought it was going to be like? I do think that's an idea I return to again and again in my books.
And you were saying that that's what your first book was about, that too. What does your life turn out to be when it wasn't what you thought it would be? And we have a choice at that point, and Mrs. Blossom has a choice at that point, to sort of give up or go on an adventure. So talk a little bit about that choice and how you created Muriel Blossom, and how much I love the last name Blossom. It is just perfect.
I mean, she was there in the test series all this time, just waiting to be noticed, waiting for her chance. I mean, it's a very meta book. This is the book about how Mrs. Blossom becomes the main character in the book and in her life. I mean, someone literally says to her, you need to be the main character in your own life. And it's also a very meta book in that, as I was writing it, I realized, here I've devoted most of my adult life to narrative, as have you, Hank. And stories have a beginning and middle and an end. And there's rising action, climax, falling action. And when you're crafting a narrative, the story in its third act, sort of like by definition, by tradition, it narrows. Possibilities become fewer because you're going to reveal who the killer was and certain things have been eliminated. But writing this book, I realized that the third act of your life does not have to narrow. It doesn't have to follow narrative structure. And what if, in what is just, by any insurance company's life expectancy chart, I'm definitely in the third part of my life, even if I have as good a life as my mom had. But does that mean there's a narrowing? And I think, and it's a little privilege because you need to be lucky in your health and lucky in your finances. But I think if we rethink how we see this third act, it can actually be opening up and it can be full of possibilities. I'm 66. I love to tell people my age. I love to ask for the senior discount everywhere I go. And I do. It's like, is there a senior discount? Fantastic. Great. Do you want to see my ID? And I've had people who are like, oh, you're not an old lady. I'm like, no, I am an old lady. And although I'm one who became a mother late in life, so that's a little bit unusual since I still have a teenager living with me. But in general, I am just living my best old lady life. I'm a docent at a museum. I travel all the time. I go to theater. It's like, this is fantastic.
And you have to think that your knowledge, I mean, you have a daughter, your knowledge can be shared with your daughter so that she doesn't have to see narrowing of her life, but that she can see blossoming of her life, like Mrs. Blossom does. We are talking about Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman, and the quotes are just coming in today. Robin Stahl says, yes, we never know what is ahead of us. And it's it's true. My life is exactly the same way. I'm soaking up the senior discounts. And sometimes when I get tired, I think, what do you want? I'm 75. Let me just sit here for a minute. It's a really wonderful excuse. So much to unpack in what you were saying. I love charade too, and I love Hitchcock too. And I turned the prism in my head when you were talking about that. But someone has a goal in charade, and they're trying to solve a cool puzzle. How much fun was that for you to write? And did you know what the puzzle was when you started?
That is one of the things I knew when I started. I knew the secret that would make this mystery so confounding to the people who are all on the hunt for this missing statue. And I knew that all along, and I knew where I was going to dabble in this direction. Or, the great thing about writing crime, and this is what I love, our readers are so smart. They're so smart, and the experience is so interactive. I mean, our readers are not passive. They're not just sitting there like letting it come at them. They're like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And, there's a scene in the book, and this is based on something that happened to me, where Mrs. Blossom meets a mentalist and cannot figure out how it worked. By the way, I still don't understand how mentalists work, but I know on some level I was assisting him. And so I know that my readers, all crime readers, are so smart and so engaged that it's really fun to misdirect them. I mean, I work with that consciously, knowing, and I don't think about red herrings per se,
Right.
but I know what details a reader will like grab onto, and that how that detail can lead them astray because of expectations or general knowledge or biases that they may not even be thinking about. And that
I love reader expectations, because we're readers and we know what we expect too. So we can be like, yeah, we're not doing that. Do you know there's a book by John Vernon called Pick a Number, which reminded me of that. So read that someday in your spare time. The thing about looking for the thing or solving the puzzle is that the stakes have to be high enough. There has to be desire, there has to be need, there has to be almost sacrifice, there needs to be balance of what someone wants and how far they'll go to get it. Did you have all that too? I mean, it's so we're talking about I always call it Mrs. Blossom Takes a Vacation. Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman. Did you know those elements, or did those evolve along the way? So much fun to read this.
I think it evolved. I'm not sure that I went into the novel knowing that Mrs. Blossom had a secret. I think that is something that did evolve as I wrote about her. When I read from this book, I often read a passage in which she's having a conversation about the fact that she is a woman of size, which is really important to me. She is a woman who would use objectively the term fat. It's important to her. And she's having this conversation with someone about how lovely her marriage was and how perfect it was. And the person says, always, question mark, always. And the next line is, always she lied. In that, and she did have a great marriage. She did have a great husband, but there's something that happened during her marriage that was hurtful and shameful, and she's never been able to tell anyone. And that's something, I don't think that was there when I started. I mean, I feel like the first line was always there. I wish I could remember the moment that I wrote Mrs. Blossom had never been upgraded in her life, because it is one of the few times in a pretty long career where I was like, that's it. That is the first line. I never have to rewrite that. I know that I've nailed it.
I mean, it's a wonderful first line, because it gives you the entire backstory of somebody's life, and also starts the story going forward with an adventure that's never happened before. Certainly a fish out of water story is completely telegraphed in that one gorgeous line. The other thing, you were talking about character-driven stories, and it's very, some people say, I don't know who they are, but some people say the less description of a person, the better in a book. Don't tell me how someone looks. Let me just figure that out. And you very carefully and specifically did not do that. Talk a little bit about how and why you made Mrs. Blossom look like what she looks like, and why it's more than just what she looks like that's important?
I think part of the reason I wrote this book is because reader email does stick with me when it's thoughtful and sincere. Like an attack won't stick with me, but specifically when Mrs. Blossom first appeared in the Tess Monahan series, someone wrote me and felt that I was a little bit ageist. And they were referring specifically in that book to Mrs. Blossom's aversion to all things tech. And I kind of shrugged it off because that had been inspired by my own mom, who was a retired librarian and very smart and knew how to do everything. She just didn't want to have a laptop and she didn't want to have a smartphone. And I mean, I think my mom ended up learning how to text when she was about 91 or so. She finally started, using, and she didn't like email. So it was like, he was like, is it ageist? I was thinking about my own mom. And then in reference to another character in another book, someone wrote me such a really smart email about a description in the first chapter of a book in which a fat woman was described in a way that they felt was really unkind. And they said, and before you, they were so smart, they said, and before you argue that it's a POV issue, that it's telling me more about the woman describing the woman, I still want you to think about it. This is unkind. This is aggressive. Over the pandemic, we all did such interesting things over the pandemic. I kind of became immersed in the work of writers like Virginia Saul-Smith, Aubrey Gordon, Kate Mann, who was nominated for a National Book Award about her book on women and their bodies. It's called Unshrinking. Mm-hmm. And I was really taken in by what they talk about. They call it diet culture. They talk about anti-fatness, prefer not to say fat phobia because they feel that that almost gives credence to being anti-fat if you describe it as a phobia. And I was really interested in what they were saying. I personally had given up dieting in 2018 after spending 40 plus years of my life doing that. And I was trying to kind of make peace with my body. And I was like, well, here's Mrs. Blossom. It's established within the world and within my universe that she's a fat woman. I mean, I feel bad that in the first book, I think I described her as looking like a sofa because she's wearing like a big flowered dress. I don't feel good about that. And so I was like, this is a chance to write with more empathy and knowledge, to understand. It was really important to me to create this character. She's fine with her body. She's good in her body. By the way, one thing I always like to tell people if they haven't read the book, because once they've read the book, I think it's pretty obvious, Mrs. Blossom is really sexy for some reason. She just has that thing, like men are drawn to her. And I think it's because she is happy in her skin, but she knows the world is judging her. So the self-consciousness is not about a desire to change or a desire to lose weight or conform. It's just like, I'm okay with who I am, but so many people are not, beginning with her own mother, who like put her on diet after diet and refused to accept the fact that her daughter was just not made to be skinny. So all of those things were sort of in my head when I started to write the book.
It's so much fun to read about her because she is happy with herself, but she is aware of how some people think of her and how some people judge her. And she does blossom in the book with new clothes and new hair and a new sort of sense of herself and sense of her power. And that's one of the things I want to talk about in a minute. But before that, we're talking about that the book is, when you talked about her being sexy, it reminded me that, and she so is, and men are just drawn to her. And that's what makes this, I think, not quite cozy, because it's a little edgier and a little more suggestive than a cozy generally is. And the cozy genre, I mean, which we love with Richard Osman and Anthony Horowitz and Anita Prose and all these wonderful authors, and starting with Agatha Christie, is difficult to write, I say, in The World's Longest Question. Talk with me a little bit about how it was to write a cozy and why is this one? And did you make this one? And why did this genre fit this story?
It is a straight up cozy. Mrs. Blossom belongs in a cozy. Sure, she's been a supporting character in a PI novel, but as a main character, she belonged in a cozy. It's funny because I just had an interview published today where I think I was asked a question like, tell your origin story. And I just, typed Miss Marple and Lou Archer had a baby and here I am. And I think, I mean, we talked a little bit before before we got on. I was telling you that I felt that the great late writer Margaret Maron was kind of my patron saint when I was writing this book. She and I shared an agent. I loved her so much. She was brilliant. And her Deborah Knott series, I think, was really important and groundbreaking. And I always remember this one great line. I won't remember which Deborah Knott novel it's in, but the man that she'd met in a previous book shows up and he's her love interest. And Deborah Knott just says, what I did on my summer vacation. I just love that so much.
Again.
So, Margaret had kind of broken the ground. And I think there are certainly other writers who have been like, my good friend Sujata Massey, when she published The Salaryman's Daughter, it was a cozy with incredibly good sex scenes. So I know that, again, we want to draw the curtain a little bit. It's not going to be hardcore,
graphic sex on the
graphic sex scenes, but still you can take it a little further if you wish. I mean, it depends on the character. I don't think it makes sense for Miss Marple to be having romance, but it made sense for Mrs. Blossom.
I'm just thinking about Miss Marple in love. That would not be a bad idea. And lust is pretty sexy, and desire is pretty sexy. And you can, our imaginations are pretty sexy. So if we let them be that way, are there conventions of cozy that you had to think about? I mean, you must be an Agatha Christie fan. We're all Agatha Christie fans. Were there elements that you thought of that you wanted to make sure were included in this?
Well, so here's one of the mistakes I made early in the first draft, where my editor had to point this out to me. She said, you don't have enough characters.
Oh.
So I had remembered that a cozy has to be kind of a contained community, that, in a cozy, traditionally, the killer comes from within, is part of this closed off group. And she said, it's just going to be too easy to figure out because you just didn't give us enough people. It was like, oh, I felt so embarrassed. It's like, I like to think I'm kind of experienced and I know what I'm doing, but I was like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good note. Yeah, I have to have a bigger cast. So I had to do things like that. I'm a big poetry nerd at this point in my life. When I talked about being my best old lady self, another part of my old lady self is I discovered this amazing free course, Modern Contemporary Poetry. It goes by the shorthand of ModPo, and it's free on the Coursera platform through the University of Pennsylvania, and it goes live every September. And there are people who take it over and over and over again, and I'm now one of those nerds. Like, I'm part of the group that we meet like across 7 time zones on Friday afternoons to talk, to Zoom about a poem. And I thought, you know what? The cozy is like a really rigorous form in poetry. It could be like a sonnet, which has to have 14 lines, or it could be a sestina or an abecedarian, but it's more rigorous in its form than any of the other subgenres in crime that I can think of. I cannot think of something. Look, it's the hardest book I've ever written for sure.
Well, tell me a little about that. Why?
Well, because first of all, I chose to be in one person's point of view. And as a writing teacher, one thing I love to tell my students is that paradoxically, one of the easiest things to do to create better pacing in your book is something that most first timers aren't ready to do, but it's multiple POV. It's like when you can move from character to character to character, you can pace and you can withhold information and you can kind of take people up to like a little mini cliffhanger, and then you just change point of view and they're not allowed to resolve it for a while. So we're in Mrs. Blossom's head for this entire book, so you can't use POV to enhance pacing, but you also can't just kill people willy-nilly or so I had to figure out, well, how do you create suspense when there's not going to be, I mean, in most of my books, there's not a rising body count. If I think I don't drop a lot of bodies usually. I've had some books with big body counts, but in general, no. But as we go through, there's a death very early on in this book, but that's it. And there's some curiosity about the death. Was it an accident? Was it a murder? Of course, the reader knows it's a murder. Who was it?
But the thing about writing in that one point of view, and people don't know may not know what a tightrope that is to walk, is that because you're only in one person's point of view, everything she finds out, everything Mrs. Blossom finds out, she has to find out on her own. Someone has to tell her, she has to find it, she has to see it. There's no information that that the reader gets that Mrs. Blossom doesn't really get. And that is a very difficult road to hoe.
It is. This was a tough book. I have never worked harder on a book than I worked on this one. It was so humbling.
Well, and it just turned out to be so fantastic. We're talking about Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman. So many wonderful comments, and we'll get to your questions in a minute. Katie says, I love new authors to me. And Betty Fellow says, how have I missed Laura's book up till now? I can't wait to read this one. And Betty, that is why we are here today. I was talking as we wind up, and then I'll get to your questions in maybe 2 minutes-ish or so, although I have about 100,000 more, but I'm not going to do that. One of the things that I love so much about this book is the worldview that you allow Mrs. Blossom to come to know and reveal to, I just thought of this, reveal to the readers and herself. It's not just the plot that develops and has a solution. It's almost like Mrs. Blossom's life gets a solution, or gets. Do you see what I mean? I'm trying to.
No, that's so actually funny. Right. It's funny. I did a library event for this book, where one woman in the audience had already read the book, and she said, "I want to talk about the ending," and like everyone in the room went, "No!" And she said, "It's not the mystery," and I was like, "It kind of is." It's like, I know that it's not about the crime itself, but the last line of that book is about Mrs. Blossom solving a kind of personal mystery.
Yes.
And that was the most important thing to me. I mean, again, it was, I remember when I finally got to that ending, and it was probably like on draft 3 or draft 4. And I was like, okay, that's just the way I felt about the first line. I felt the way like, yes, that is the right final paragraph. I mean, I had a new editor on this book. I'd had the same wonderful editor for my entire career. She left HarperCollins. She went to Simon & Schuster. So I'm now working with a new editor whom I adore. And, she wrote me and said when she read that ending that she cried. And I was like, kind of what I'm going for, because I cried too.
You can't help but cry at the end, because it's so universally personal. If you open your heart to that, it is so life-changing. If you open your heart to that, I hope I'm making you realize what a good book Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman is, because not just the story, but the meaning of the story. And it's not heavy-handed. It's fun and witty and wise and seamless and clever and puzzling. And I want to know, though, my last question is, when you Laura Lippman, and everybody knows what to expect from Laura Lippman, we thought, pitched this to your agent or editor, what did you say? And what did they say back?
I can't honestly remember. What I remember is when it was said and done, everyone seemed pretty cool with it. Everyone seemed to think like, why not?
Yeah.
When it was said and done, the first question I was asked by both my US editor and my UK editor was, are we going to see more Mrs. Blossom books? And it was asked in a very hopeful way. And I think there will be more Mrs. Blossom books. I've been keeping quite the file of ideas on places for her to go and adventures for her to have.
Well, I don't want your readers to forget where Mrs. Blossom comes from. This isn't out of the clear blue. And her old boss has a little role in the story as well. Can you just tell us about that briefly?
Mrs. Blossom is someone that P.I. Tess Monahan met when she was trying to teach a continuing ed course on how to be an investigator. And Mrs. Blossom, who was newly widowed at the time, took it trying to kind of like fill this void in her life. And she was, from the beginning, sort of a prodigy at surveillance, in part because she was an older woman and no one paid attention to her. And that comes up in this. I mean, there's a sequence in which Mrs. Blossom realizes that someone's following her. And she's like, that's different. I've followed so many people and never been caught. And, you know, she has to figure out how to shake her own tail. And yeah, she worked for Tess Monahan for a couple of years, and she's been out west in Arizona taking care of grandchildren who don't need her anymore. And, you know, I think that's a big part of this story, is it's a story about a woman who has defined most of her adult life as a caretaker. She was a wife, she was a mother, she helped with her grandchildren, and now all of that is kind of over, and she has to be on her own, and she has to figure out who she is when she's not taking care of other people.
And that is such a powerful closing for this interview. Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman. I hope you can grasp the depth of the story and the fun of the story. And we are so thrilled with the tease that it might be the beginning of more Mrs. Blossoms, and with Tess should be in all the books as well. That's a wonderful homage to your own great works. Let's take some questions from the audience. I know there are many. Hey, Marissa, nice to see you. Can you describe your process and relationship with your new editor? How vital is the editor in your writing experience? Is there a significant difference between your new and previous editors? What a great, thoughtful question.
It is a great question about process. So I worked with one editor from 1995 through 2022. And I would say the primary difference between my old editor and my new editor is my new editor had this evil inspired idea. I don't know how she knew to do this. She found, it's like, what's the opposite of your, like, I thought it was the opposite of my Achilles heel. I thought one of the best things about me as a journalist, and I bet you're like this too, Hank, is I'm so good at deadlines. Like, give me a deadline. I'm always going to meet my deadlines. So she kept sending this book back to me for revision. And I'd say, what's the deadline? She's like, send it back when it's done. Like, what? Like, how dare you? Like, how am I supposed to know when it's done?
That is evil.
It was evil, and it was really brilliant. It was like just such evil brilliance, because it made me see that the deadline can kind of become, I don't think self-fulfilling prophecy is quite the right word, but it becomes an excuse to say, well, you needed it by this date, so here it is. I've done the best I can do. And to be told that, like, no, send it back to me when it's done. And she did that to me 3 times.
I just love that. It's like when your parents say, we trust you to do the right thing, you know, and the bar just goes way up, you know, when they say, you decide, Laura, if it's done, then but it's responsible.
Also, because I came out of the newspaper world, I have had so many editors, and I've worked with so many people that in some ways, I mean, I feel like I can probably work with anybody. And that I can probably adapt to almost anyone's style. Although I once heard a story about a really famous New York editor who told one of her writers that she was wrong about who the killer was. And I was like, oh, I could never work for that person. I could never have someone just flat out tell me that she knew my book better than I did. That would drive me crazy.
I mean, it is interesting because someone might say, have you ever thought about the possibility of what if this? I mean, that's an open door. I have an editor. She is completely a genius, who once called me and said, I've got your edits. I've got your book. I love your book. It's fantastic. I have one little thought. She says, go get a glass of wine and then call me back. So I thought, oh, here we go. And she said, you don't have to do this. It's your book. But what if you took character X, a man, and made that character a woman instead? Now, you know how much that would change everything. So, I mean, I just went, yeah, well, let me look at that. And it worked. It worked perfectly. So it's all in how you say it. It's all, if somebody said you've chosen the wrong killer, that would be a toughie.
One thing I tell my writing students is that I'd rather get what I call a BFN than death by 1,000 cuts. A BFN is a big effing note. It's like
Yeah.
so big that like what you just talked about, it's like so big that at first it breaks your brain, but it's either like you're all in or you're not all in, but you can like take it. And it's when it's just like so many detailed edits that can, like, really small edits can be really hard. And I've gone through that on some of my books for sure.
And then all the dominoes fall. So we have to change every single thing that's braided into that as well. We're talking about Murder Takes a Vacation by the fabulous Laura Lippman, out today. Who else has a question? Do you do anything special? Hey, Deborah, welcome. Do you do anything special for yourself when you launch a book?
Not always, but more often than not, I buy a piece of art. And I did find a piece in a New Orleans gallery that I will be picking up next week when I go to New Orleans. I tell people, especially young people, I've never regretted a single dollar I spent on a piece of art ever. And some of it over the years, like my taste may have changed. I may be like, well, that's not what I love anymore. But I loved it as long as I owned it. And it just gives me so much joy.
And as someone says, it's never wrong to fall in love, and you never know what's going to happen. So that is how you feel about art as well. Shall we take one last question? Have you ever considered reading your own audiobook? Your voice is perfect, says Sylvia.
I read the audiobook of my personal essays, which is called My Life as a Villainess. And wow, I've never told this story, so I'll go and tell it. Or maybe I've told it, but it's not well known. I was in a recording studio reading these personal essays, several of which were about my husband, knowing that my marriage was breaking up. But it felt like, it's like it would be weird for someone else to read those essays. But I mean, it is so hard to read an audiobook. And by the way, the person who does it for Murder Takes a Vacation is fantastic. She's also read, I think, if not all, most of Elizabeth Strout's books. She's so good. And there is a level to a novel. I'm not up to the level of acting that would be required. So no, I only read really personal stuff. So I've recorded My Life as a Villainess, and I think there was an essay in a book about the novel Lolita where I read my piece. But thank you. That's really nice. People are very nice about my voice. I had a driver recently and he was like, "You have such a smooth voice." It's like, oh,
great. That's great. That is completely a treasure. Do you remember when you first heard the voice on Mrs. Blossom?
The voice of the book, or the voice of the
reading the book.
Mm-hmm. Or the voice of the narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they sent me several people, and as it happened, and they were all great. I love Elizabeth Strout's books, and Elizabeth Strout falls into a very small group of authors. Mick Herron is also one that I toggle back and forth between audio and book, because there comes a moment where I have to know so badly what's happening that I can't do the audio anymore because I need to speed up. So I was really familiar with this narrator, and she's just so good.
And did she capture Mrs. Blossom for you? Did you?
I think so. I don't listen. I basically listen to the first page of my book. It makes me feel super self-conscious to listen to my own books on audio, because in the end, as much as I listen to so many audiobooks, and the readers are so essential, but in the end, when it comes to my own work, there is a voice inside my head that's not going to be like anyone else's voice. Yeah. There's something I hear. So it's hard to listen to the audiobooks, but at the same time, I just think she's amazing.
I agree with you on every count. It's very hard to match the voice in your head, whether that's the right voice for the audiobook or not. It's not what we've been hearing for a year, but it brings tears to your eyes when you hear it be the way they think it should be. And somebody has captured a character just like your reader did in Murder Takes a Vacation. This is Laura Lippman's brand new novel. And one of you lucky commenters will get to win a copy of this to take home for yourself. Not this one. I'm keeping this one.
It'll be this one.
That very book that Laura will sign, I hope. Let's spin the wheel of fun and see who will win. This is so great. And I know you have a big event tonight with Megan Abbott. Is that right? Where is
That's
that?
correct.
And the winner is Sharon Bishop. Yay, Sharon.
Congratulations, Sharon. This is yours.
That's fantastic. Yay. And the rest of you, you know what to do. Run, 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 click, click, click. Get your own copy. I saw Daniel Ford is here today, and Susie Baldwin and Sue Street and Katie Crutchfield and Robin Stull. So Kathy Graham, that is fabulous. Susie Baldwin. Sharon Baldwin is a marvelous friend of Crime Time. Sharon Bishop, I'm trying to say, is a marvelous friend of Crime Time, and we are so pleased that you won the book. You know what to do. Email me, and we will get you the book that Laura is holding in her hands right now. Laura, let me just ask you to stand by for 1 second while I say you all stand by for 15 more minutes, and we are going to be talking to Liza Tully about the world's greatest detective and her just okay assistant. You can see how much fun this book is. This is What If Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were a boomer and a millennial woman. So there you have it, and there's a book for you. It is just great. We have just been talking about Murder Takes a Vacation by Laura Lippman. Do not miss this novel. Thank you so much for being here today, Laura.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
And congratulations on everything. The rest of you, we will see you again, and happy trails and happy travels and happy book tour and many, many, many good wishes. And the rest of you, we will see you in about 12 minutes. Thank you, Sylvia. We will see you in about 12 minutes for Liza Tully. And remember, until then, it is always safe inside a book.